The stale, recycled air of the airport lounge tasted like defeat. It clung to Amelia's tongue, a bitter reminder of the frantic dash through terminals, the choked apologies to indifferent security guards, and the soul-crushing sight of the gate agent's triumphant shake of the head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The door has closed." Closed. The word echoed in the cavernous space, each syllable a hammer blow against her already frayed nerves. Her flight to Denver, the one that held the promise of a much-needed escape, a chance to breathe air that wasn't thick with the dust of her recent past, was gone. Vanished. And it was all because of him. She clutched her carry-on, the worn leather of familiar comfort against her clammy palm. Inside were the neatly packed clothes for her sister's wedding, the carefully chosen gift, the meticulously planned itinerary. All of it now felt like a cruel joke, a testament to her misplaced optimism. Across the polished floor, bathed in the unforgiving fluorescent light, sat Liam. He was leaning back in a plush armchair, a picture of infuriating calm. His dark hair, usually a controlled mess, was a little more disheveled than usual, but it only served to enhance his rugged appeal. He was scrolling through his phone, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He hadn't even looked at her since they'd landed in this purgatory of delayed departures and missed connections. Amelia's chest tightened with a familiar, unwelcome ache. It had been 6 months since their messy, explosive breakup. 6 months of painstakingly rebuilding her life, brick by agonizing brick, only to have him appear like some spectral harbinger of chaos, derailing her carefully constructed peace. She'd seen him at the coffee shop near her apartment, then at the grocery store, and now, here, at the very same airport, on the very same flight. It felt less like coincidence and more like a cosmic taunt. The initial sighting had been a jolt, a physical punch to the gut. She'd been rushing through security, mentally rehearsing her answers to her sister's inevitable barrage of wedding-related questions, when she'd seen him. He was ahead of her in the line, his familiar broad shoulders, and the way he ran a hand through his hair. A gesture she knew intimately, a gesture that used to send shivers down her spine. Her breath had hitched. Her carefully constructed composure had begun to crumble. She'd tried to avoid him, to melt into the anonymous throng of travelers. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she'd fumbled for her boarding pass, distracted by the sight of him, her phone had slipped from her grasp, skittering across the floor and landing with a sickening thud near his feet. He'd picked it up, his eyes meeting hers across the sterile expanse of the security checkpoint. That was the moment it all went wrong. The world had narrowed to the space between them. His gaze, once so full of warmth and adoration, now held a flicker of something unreadable, something that triggered a buried storm of emotions within her. "Amelia?" His voice, deeper than she remembered, had cut through the airport din. She'd frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Liam," she'd managed, her voice a shaky whisper. He'd taken a step towards her, a tentative smile gracing his lips. "Fancy seeing you here." The ensuing conversation had been a disaster, a clumsy dance of apologies and awkward small talk. She'd been so flustered, so thrown by his presence, that she'd lost track of time, of everything. She'd been so caught up in the ghost of their past, in the phantom echoes of shared laughter and whispered secrets, that she'd completely forgotten the ticking clock. By the time she'd finally reached the gate, her face flushed and her hands trembling, the gate agent had already begun the final boarding call. The sight of the closed door, the indifferent expression on the agent's face, the finality of it all, had sent a wave of nausea washing over her. She'd turned, her eyes finding Liam again. He was still standing there, a silent observer of her downfall. There was no sympathy in his eyes, no offer of help. Just that same unreadable expression, a hint of something that might have been amusement or perhaps just a detached curiosity. Now, hours later, marooned in this limbo, the anger simmered beneath the surface of her despair. She'd missed her flight. Her sister's wedding was only 2 days away. And the airline, in their infinite wisdom, had rebooked her on the next available flight. The only flight available. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, who else would be on that flight. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. She looked at Liam again. He finally looked up from his phone, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering for a moment before he turned away. It was a glance devoid of emotion, a casual observation that somehow felt like a deliberate snub. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath, the words catching in her throat. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed a frantic text to her sister. "Flight missed, stuck, rebooked for tomorrow, so sorry." The reply came back almost instantly. "OMG, what happened? Is everything okay? Don't worry, we'll figure it out. Just get here safe." Her sister's unwavering support was a small comfort, a flicker of light in the encroaching darkness. But it didn't erase the gnawing anxiety, the sense of impending doom. The airline representative's voice crackled over the intercom, a disembodied drone that seemed to mock her predicament. "Attention passengers booked on Flight 47B to Denver. This flight has been delayed due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for any inconvenience." Amelia's head snapped up. Flight 47B. That was his flight. The one he'd been heading to. A cold dread washed over her. This couldn't be happening. She practically ran to the customer service desk, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling. "I was supposed to be on Flight 47B to Denver. I missed it. You rebooked me, but I need to know, is there another flight?" The agent, a young woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, tapped away at her keyboard. "Let me see. Ah, yes. You've been rebooked on Flight 47B, departing at 8:30 p.m. Amelia's stomach plummeted. "But I was supposed to be on an earlier flight. And is there anyone else booked on that flight? Anyone I might know?" She cursed herself for the question, for the desperate hope that he wouldn't be on it. The agent's smile faltered slightly. "All our flights are currently experiencing significant delays and rebookings. I can't give you specific passenger information, ma'am. However, the 8:30 p.m. flight is the only one with available seats to Denver tonight." Amelia's breath hitched. She knew. She knew with a sickening certainty. She looked towards the lounge, towards the area where Liam was sitting. He was still there, still engrossed in his phone. But now, a new layer of dread had settled over her. She wasn't just going to miss her sister's wedding. She was going to be trapped on a plane for hours with the man who had the power to unravel her world with a single glance. The stale airport air suddenly felt suffocating. The announcement, a disembodied drone that echoed through the cavernous space, confirmed my deepest, most gnawing anxiety. Flight 47B, service to Denver, has been experiencing delays and is now scheduled for departure at 9:30 p.m. My stomach plummeted, a sickening thud against my ribs. 9:30 p.m. That was it. The last flight. The only flight. The unspoken implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. If Liam was rebooked, and he surely was, then he was on this flight. With me. A wave of nausea washed over me, the stale recycled air suddenly tasting like defeat. 6 months. 6 months of carefully constructed peace, each day a brick carefully laid in the foundation of my new, Liam-free existence. I had meticulously purged him from my life, from my phone, from my thoughts, or so I'd believed. And then, Like a spectral harbinger of chaos, he reappeared, not once, but 3 times in as many weeks. The grocery store where I'd frozen, clutching a carton of almond milk like a shield. The coffee shop where I'd nearly scalded myself with a latte. And now, here. This cosmic taunt, orchestrated by the universe and facilitated by a dropped phone and a missed boarding call. My sister's text buzzed in my pocket, a small beacon of warmth in the encroaching chill. "Almost there, sis. Can't wait to see you. Dad's already asking if you'll be on time for brunch." Brunch. The word felt like a cruel joke. My carefully planned arrival, the promise of a joyous reunion, the comfort of family, all of it was now overshadowed by the looming presence of Liam. I slumped onto a molded plastic chair, the unforgiving fluorescent light buzzing overhead, amplifying the already overwhelming hum of the airport. Other passengers milled about, a blur of tired faces and rolling luggage, each on their own journey, blissfully unaware of the personal purgatory I now inhabited. I pulled my phone out, my thumb hovering over my sister's contact. What could I even say? "Hey, so remember how I was coming to your wedding? Well, I'm going to be late. Very late. And I'm going to be stuck on a plane for the next 5 hours with the man who broke my heart, because I'm an idiot, and apparently the universe hates me. No, I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened my messaging app and found Liam's contact. My fingers twitched, a familiar, dangerous impulse to lash out, to demand an explanation. "Why?" I typed, then deleted. "Seriously, Liam? Again?" Deleted. The sheer absurdity of it all was almost comical, if it didn't feel so devastatingly real. He was a master of the unexpected reappearance, a poltergeist in the meticulously curated reality I had built for myself. My gaze drifted to the departure board, a vast glowing tapestry of destinations and times. Flight 47B, Denver. Delayed. The words seemed to mock me, a constant reminder of my predicament. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure a shield of indifference, a protective layer of calm. But the memory of his eyes, that unnervingly familiar shade of blue, flashed behind my eyelids. He always looked at me like he saw right through my carefully constructed facade, like he knew exactly what I was thinking, what I was feeling. And that was the most terrifying part. A sharp jab of anger pierced through the fog of my despair. This wasn't just bad luck. It felt like a deliberate act. Liam, with his infuriating calm and his ability to appear exactly when I least expected him. He knew how much I dreaded running into him. He knew how much I'd worked to move on. Was this his way of proving he still had a hold over me? A subtle, insidious reminder that he could still unravel my world, brick by agonizing brick? I pushed myself up, my legs feeling strangely heavy, as if I were wading through thick mud. I needed information. I needed to confirm my worst fears. The rebooking desk was a beacon of sterile efficiency, a long line of disgruntled travelers snaking away from it. I joined the queue, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. With each passing minute, the dread intensified, a cold, clammy hand squeezing my throat. When it was finally my turn, I approached the agent, a woman with a practiced smile and tired eyes. "Excuse me," I began, my voice a shaky whisper. "I was booked on Flight 521 to Denver, but I missed it. I've been rebooked on Flight 47B, but I just heard it's delayed. Can you confirm if there are any other flights to Denver tonight?" She tapped away at her keyboard, her fingers moving with practiced speed. The screen glowed, a silent oracle of my fate. "Flight 47B is the last flight to Denver this evening," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "It is currently scheduled to depart at 9:30 p.m. All passengers originally booked on 521 who missed their flight have been accommodated on 47B. The air left my lungs in a rush. All passengers. The words echoed in the sterile expanse of the airport, each syllable a hammer blow. There was no escape, no alternative. I was trapped. With him. Is there any chance of an upgrade? I asked, the question tumbling out before I could stop it, a desperate plea for a sliver of comfort, a tiny buffer zone between me and Liam. The agent offered a polite, almost imperceptible smile. I'm afraid not. The flight is completely full. We've utilized every available seat. Every available seat, including the one next to him, I imagined, a sick certainty settling in my gut. I mumbled a thank you, my voice barely audible, and turned away from the counter. The polished floor stretched out before me, an endless, unyielding expanse. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to just sit down and weep, to let the dam of my carefully held-together composure finally break. But I couldn't, not here, not now. I needed to find my gate. I needed to prepare myself, to build whatever flimsy defenses I could against the inevitable. As I walked, my eyes scanned the departure boards, searching for the gate number for 47B. Gate C-17. A knot tightened in my stomach. C gates were the furthest, the most isolated, a fitting end to this ignominy. I found a quiet corner near a row of vacant chairs, pulling my carry-on close. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from the airline. Your flight, 47B to Denver, has been further delayed and is now boarding at gate C-17. Please proceed to the gate immediately. Further delayed. Of course, it was like the universe was toying with me, stretching out the agony, giving me more time to anticipate the inevitable. With a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of the world, I picked up my bag and started the long trek towards gate C-17. Each step was a conscious effort, a battle against the rising tide of panic. I tried to focus on my sister, on the wedding, on the promise of a fresh start. But the image of Liam's face, his casual smile, his unnerving gaze, kept intruding, a persistent, unwelcome guest in my thoughts. As I approached gate C-17, the crowd thickened. Passengers were already lining up, their faces etched with varying degrees of impatience and exhaustion. I scanned the faces, a morbid curiosity mixed with dread propelling me forward. And then I saw him. He was leaning against the wall, a dark jacket slung over his shoulder, his phone in his hand. He looked exactly as I remembered, perhaps a little older, a little more settled, but undeniably him. His hair was slightly disheveled, a stray lock falling across his forehead, and he was talking to someone on his phone, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. My breath hitched. He hadn't seen me yet. I could still turn around, disappear into the labyrinthine corridors of the airport, pretend I'd never seen him, pretend I wasn't on this flight. But the boarding announcement had already been made. The doors would close soon. And besides, where would I go? Back to my apartment, to the suffocating silence, to the endless replays of how I'd ended up here. No. I had to face him. I took a deep breath, trying to channel the last vestiges of my composure. I gripped the handle of my suitcase, its worn leather a familiar, grounding sensation. I started walking towards the gate, my eyes fixed on the boarding pass in my hand, my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. He was still talking on his phone, his back to me. A small, fleeting window of opportunity. As I neared the gate agent, I held out my boarding pass. She scanned it, her expression neutral. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice a disembodied drone. And then, as if on cue, Liam's phone call ended. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the boarding passengers, and his eyes met mine. The world seemed to tilt. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then something unreadable. He paused, mid-stride, his eyes locked on mine. The carefully constructed walls I'd spent months building crumbled around me, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and utterly trapped. The flight attendant called my name, the sound distant and muffled. I was on the flight, and he was too. And now, as I saw him standing there, his expression unreadable, a chilling certainty settled over me. This was not going to be a quiet flight. The disembodied drone of the boarding announcement had long since faded, replaced by the dull roar of the airport. Amelia clutched her worn carry-on, her knuckles white, as if the worn canvas could anchor her to a reality where Liam wasn't about to become her involuntary travel companion. The walk to the gate had felt like an eternity. Each step a new layer of dread added to the gnawing anxiety already coiling in her stomach. She'd replayed the sequence of events a dozen times in her head. The fumbled phone, the jarring recognition of Liam's voice, the brief, agonizingly polite exchange that had somehow derailed her entire, carefully planned escape. And now this, rebooked, on the last flight to Denver. A flight that, by some cosmic taunt, shared the same destination, the same purgatory, as Liam. She'd seen his name on the rebooking screen, a stark, unforgivable block of text that had sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. She'd almost protested, almost demanded a different flight, any flight, even if it meant sleeping on a bench until morning. But the agent, a woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach them, had simply shaken her head. "That's the only seat we have, ma'am. Last one to Denver tonight." Now, standing at the threshold of the jet bridge, the air thick with the scent of stale, recycled air and a faint undercurrent of jet fuel. The reality hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had to board this plane. With him. The thought tasted like defeat, bitter and metallic. Her sister's wedding, her escape, her sanctuary. All of it was now tainted, overshadowed by the spectral harbinger of her past. She'd blocked him, deleted his number, meticulously scrubbed him from her digital life. She'd spent months rebuilding, brick by agonizing brick, a life that was hers alone, a life where his presence was a distant, hazy memory. And here he was, a tangible, breathing reminder of everything she was trying to leave behind. She took a shaky breath, her clammy palms slick against the cool metal of her boarding pass. The woman at the gate scanned it with a perfunctory swipe, her gaze never meeting Amelia's. A small green light flashed, a disembodied drone confirming her passage. She stepped onto the jet bridge, the incline a gentle slope into the unknown, into the suffocating proximity of Liam. Her eyes scanned the rows of seats as she made her way down the aisle, a desperate, futile search for confirmation, for denial. She'd deliberately chosen a seat near the back, hoping for anonymity, for a buffer zone, a chasm of empty seats between her and him. But as she neared her assigned row, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. There he was, sitting by the window, unreadable, just as she remembered, and next to him, the empty seat. Her empty seat. A wave of heat flushed her face, a visceral reaction to the sheer, unbearable indignity of it all. She wanted to turn around, to demand the gate agent find her another seat, any other seat. But the line behind her was growing, a silent pressure to keep moving. So she forced herself to walk the final few steps, her gaze fixed on the seat in front of her, on the worn fabric, on the tiny pocket designed to hold a magazine she had no intention of reading. She slid into the aisle seat, her movements stiff, robotic. She avoided looking at him, focusing instead on the impossibly small space, on the task of stowing her bag. She wrestled it into the overhead compartment, the effort providing a welcome distraction, a physical outlet for the tempest raging within. When she finally settled into her seat, she kept her eyes fixed forward, her posture rigid, a statue carved from pure, unadulterated dread. The cabin filled around them, a cacophony of rustling bags, hushed conversations, and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the aircraft. Amelia's senses were on high alert, acutely aware of every shift in the air, every subtle movement from her seatmate. She could feel his presence beside her, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate through the entire cabin. She imagined his scent, a phantom memory of something clean and vaguely woody, and her jaw tightened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from her sister. "Almost there. So excited to see you. Can't wait for wedding dress shopping tomorrow." Amelia stared at the message, a lump forming in her throat. She couldn't possibly tell her sister about this. Not now. Not when she was so close. She typed a quick reply, her thumbs moving mechanically. "On my way. See you soon." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, the screen going dark, mirroring the black void that seemed to be expanding inside her. She braced herself for the inevitable. For the moment he would turn, for the casual greeting, for the forced pleasantries that would feel like 1,000 tiny needles. The flight attendant's voice, a disembodied drone, announced the final boarding call for their flight. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut for a brief moment, a silent plea for the universe to intervene, to somehow rearrange the seating chart, to beam her to a different plane, a different city, a different life. But the plane shuddered, a gentle lurch that signaled their imminent departure. Silence. A heavy, charged silence stretched between them. Amelia held her breath, her gaze still fixed on the seat back in front of her. She could feel him looking at her. She knew it with a sickening certainty. The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of shared history and a brutal, abrupt ending. Then a voice, low, calm, a tone that had once soothed her and now only served to prickle her nerves. "Amelia." It was barely a whisper, yet it echoed in the cavernous space of her awareness like a shout. She didn't turn. She couldn't. Her throat felt tight, her lungs constricted. She focused on the tiny, intricate pattern of the seat fabric, willing herself to disappear, to become one with the worn upholstery. "Amelia, are you going to ignore me?" The question hung in the air, laced with a hint of something she couldn't quite decipher. Annoyance? Amusement? She suspected the latter. Liam had always had a talent for finding her discomfort amusing. Finally, she forced herself to turn her head, her neck stiff, her movements jerky. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting second, she saw something flicker in their depths, a ghost of the man she'd known, a shadow of shared laughter and whispered secrets. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar, unreadable calm. His gaze was steady, his expression neutral, as if their past was an insignificant footnote in the grand narrative of their lives. "What do you want, Liam?" Her voice was a shaky whisper, rougher than she intended. He offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Just saying hello. Didn't expect to see you on this flight." "Neither did I," she replied, the words clipped. She turned back to face forward, the conversation already a drain on her already depleted energy. "I'm trying to get to my sister's wedding." "Right, of course. Congratulations to her." He paused, and she could feel him watching her, a silent question in his gaze. "You look different." Amelia bristled. Was that a compliment? An observation? A veiled criticism? She couldn't tell. "It's been a while, Liam." "It has," he agreed, his voice even. "Almost a year." He shifted in his seat, and she felt the subtle movement beside her. "Still heading to Denver, then?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm, a small attempt to reclaim some control. "My sister's wedding is tomorrow." "That must be why you're so upset about missing your flight." He said it like a statement of fact, devoid of any real empathy. Amelia's jaw clenched. The nerve. He was the reason she'd missed it, and he was acting as if she'd simply had bad luck. "It was a series of unfortunate events," she said, choosing her words carefully. He chuckled, a low, soft sound that grated on her nerves. "Unfortunate events? Yes, that's one way to put it. He leaned back, his eyes drifting towards the window. So, are you going to spend the entire flight ignoring me? The question hung in the air, a cosmic taunt. She wanted to scream, to tell him to leave her alone, to disappear. But the plane was already taxiing, the engines whining louder, a physical barrier to escape. They were in this together, for the next 3 hours. 3 hours of confined space, of forced proximity, of reliving the ghost of their past. Amelia stared out the window, the landscape blurring into streaks of light and shadow. The city lights receded, replaced by the inky blackness of the night sky. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the calm she'd felt before the airport. Before Liam. It was a futile effort. The gnawing anxiety was back, stronger than ever, a sickening certainty that this flight, this reunion, was going to be far worse than she could have imagined. She had missed her flight because of him. And now, the universe, in its infinite and cruel wisdom, had decided to seat them together on the next one. The journey to her sister's wedding had just become a journey through hell. The disembodied drone of the intercom announcing final boarding calls for flights to destinations I could only dream of reaching felt like a personal taunt. My stomach churned, a bitter cocktail of anxiety and lingering frustration. Each announcement chipped away at the fragile peace I'd been trying to cultivate since Liam and I, since everything imploded. 6 months. 6 months of carefully curated distance, of rebuilding my life brick by agonizing brick, only to have him materialize at the airport, a spectral harbinger of chaos. Now this, the universe, it seemed, had a particularly cruel sense of humor. Rebooked, last flight, and seated next to him. My eyes flickered to Liam, his profile a study in infuriating composure. He hadn't said anything since the gate agent, with her practiced, almost spectral smile, had pointed to our assigned seats. He'd simply picked up his carry-on, his movements fluid and unhurried, a stark contrast to the frantic energy that had seized me. I clutched my boarding pass, the thin paper a flimsy shield against the impending doom. 3 hours. 3 hours trapped in a metal tube with the architect of my current misery. The air in the terminal, already thick with the stale scent of recycled air and hurried footsteps, suddenly felt suffocating. I could feel his presence next to me, a gravitational pull I desperately wanted to resist. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, its frantic rhythm a stark betrayal of my attempts at stoicism. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to ground myself. Focus, Amelia. It's just a flight, just 3 hours. But the gnawing anxiety persisted. This wasn't just any flight. This was Denver. This was Sarah's wedding. This was supposed to be a joyous reunion, a celebration of family, not a forced proximity with an ex who still occupied far too much real estate in my head. I glanced at my phone, a desperate attempt to escape the immediate reality. A text from Sarah. You okay? Heard you got rebooked. So sorry. Still coming, right? Love you. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Sarah. My anchor in the storm. I typed back, my fingers still trembling slightly. On the last flight. See you soon. Love you more. It was a lie, of course. I wasn't okay. I was a tightly wound spring, every nerve-ending screaming in protest at the situation. But I couldn't let Sarah worry. Not now. Not on her big day. The boarding announcement for our flight, a disembodied drone that seemed to echo the hollowness in my chest, finally came. Liam rose, a silent invitation to follow. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pushed myself up, my movements stiff. The polished floor of the concourse seemed to stretch out before me, an endless expanse leading to my personal purgatory. As I walked, I tried to maintain a neutral expression, a mask of polite indifference. But inside, My mind was a chaotic whirl. Was this a coincidence? Had he deliberately sought me out? The thought sent a fresh wave of anger and suspicion coursing through me. Liam had always been good at playing the victim, at making things seem like fate when, in reality, they were carefully orchestrated. I remembered our last argument, the words hurled like weapons, the raw, jagged edges of our breakup. He knew how much this wedding meant to me. He knew how much I needed this escape. We reached the gate, and the attendant, a young woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, scanned our boarding passes. Liam went first, his stride even. I followed, my gaze fixed on the jet bridge, a dark tunnel leading into the unknown. As I stepped onto the plane, the familiar scent of recycled air and faint disinfectant washed over me. It was a sterile, impersonal smell, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil brewing within me. The cabin was dimly lit, the uninviting fluorescent light casting long shadows. I found my seat, 14B, and Liam was already there, occupying 14A. My assigned seat. Of course. He'd already stowed his carry-on in the overhead bin and was settling into the window seat, his movements efficient. He offered a brief nod in my direction, his expression unreadable. That was Liam's specialty, an unreadable facade that masked, what? Indifference? Amusement? A perverse sense of satisfaction? I slid into the aisle seat, the narrow space a physical manifestation of my discomfort. The seatbelt buckle felt cold and unforgiving against my clammy palm. I tried to avoid looking at him, focusing instead on the safety card tucked into the seat pocket in front of me. The diagrams of oxygen masks and life vests seemed to mock my situation. If there's an emergency, at least you'll be guaranteed to be separated. The thought was morbid, but it brought a flicker of dark humor. The plane began to fill, the murmur of voices and the clatter of luggage creating a low hum. Each new passenger was a wave of potential distraction, and I clung to it, desperately, until the cabin door closed with a soft thud. The engines whined to life, a low growl that vibrated through the fuselage. This was it. There was no turning back now. Liam turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting mine for a fleeting moment. His eyes, a deep hazel I remembered with a painful clarity, held an expression I couldn't decipher. There was no apology, no explanation, just a quiet acknowledgement of our shared predicament. It was that very ambiguity that always unsettled me. He was a puzzle I'd never fully solved, and now it seemed I was trapped with him until we reached the end of the flight. The plane taxied onto the runway, a slow, deliberate movement that felt agonizingly protracted. I braced myself, gripping the armrest. This was going to be a long flight. The takeoff was a violent surge, pressing me back into my seat. The ground fell away, the airport lights shrinking into a glittering tapestry below. We were airborne, and I was stuck. As we climbed, the cabin lights dimmed further, leaving only the faint glow of the emergency exit signs and the individual reading lights. The hum of the engines became a constant, pervasive drone, a sonic blanket that muffled the outside world. Liam leaned his head back against the seat, his eyes closed. Was he sleeping? Or was he just pretending? I pulled out my earbuds, the familiar comfort of music. A small solace. I scrolled through my playlists, searching for something that wouldn't amplify my anxiety, something neutral, something that wouldn't remind me of him. But every upbeat pop song felt too cheerful, every melancholic ballad too on the nose. I settled for a generic instrumental mix, the gentle melodies a thin veil over the churning ocean of my emotions. I risked a glance at Liam. He was still leaning back, his face relaxed, but his hands were clasped loosely in his lap, his fingers interlaced. It was a subtle detail, but it spoke of a coiled tension beneath the surface. He wasn't asleep. He was waiting. Waiting for what? For me to crack? For me to engage? The flight attendant came by, her cart rattling down the aisle. "Would you care for anything to drink?" she asked, her voice a practiced, cheerful lilt. "Water, please," I managed, my voice a shaky whisper. Liam stirred slightly. "Same," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly smooth. The attendant placed our drinks on the tray tables. The ice in my water glass clinked, a sharp, brittle sound in the otherwise quiet cabin. I took a long sip, the cold liquid a welcome balm to my parched throat. I avoided looking at Liam, focusing on the condensation forming on the outside of my glass. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. It was a silence I remembered all too well, the suffocating quiet that descended after a fight, filled with unspoken words and lingering resentment. But this was different. This was a silence born of necessity, of circumstance, and it was infinitely more unnerving. I tried to distract myself, pulling out my book. It was a novel I'd been looking forward to reading, a story of faraway lands and grand adventures, but the words blurred on the page. My mind kept drifting back to Liam, to the past, to the present, to the terrifying unknown of the next 3 hours. My gaze drifted to his hand, resting on the armrest. His fingers were long and strong, the same fingers that had once traced the curve of my jaw, that had held mine so tightly. A visceral pang shot through me, a mixture of longing and revulsion. I quickly looked away, my cheeks flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with the cabin temperature. The plane began its descent, the gentle tilt of the fuselage a signal that our forced confinement was nearing its end. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh surge of anxiety. Denver. Sarah's wedding. And Liam. He shifted in his seat, and I tensed, expecting him to speak. But he just stretched his legs, his movements deliberate. As the plane banked, the city lights of Denver spread out below us, a glittering expanse of possibility and dread. The wheels touched down with a sickening thud, and the cabin erupted in a ripple of applause, a collective sigh of relief. But for me, it was just the prelude to the next act. The plane taxied to the gate, the engines finally falling silent. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and a flurry of activity ensued as passengers scrambled to retrieve their luggage. Liam remained in his seat, unhurried. He looked at me then, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was simply there. And in that moment, as the cabin door opened and the rush of airport air filled the plane, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The flight had ended, but the journey with Liam had just begun. And I had a sinking feeling that the turbulence was far from over. The stale, recycled air of the airport lounge tasted like defeat, a bitter reminder of the frantic dash, the choked apologies, and the soul-crushing sight of the closed gate. Amelia's flight to Denver, her much-needed escape, was gone. And it was all because of Liam. She clutched her carry-on, the worn leather a familiar comfort against her clammy palm. Inside were the neatly packed clothes for her sister's wedding, the carefully chosen gift, the meticulously planned itinerary. All of it now felt like a cruel joke. Across the polished floor, bathed in unforgiving fluorescent light, sat Liam, a picture of infuriating calm. Hours later, marooned in airport limbo, the announcement confirmed her deepest, most gnawing anxiety. Flight 47B to Denver, the last flight out, had been delayed until 9:30 p.m. My stomach plummeted. Liam was rebooked, and so was I. We were on the same flight. The universe, it seemed, had a particularly cruel sense of humor. The walk to gate C-17 felt like an eternity. Each step was a battle against rising panic. Then I saw him, leaning against the wall, phone in hand, looking exactly as I remembered, He hadn't seen me yet. A small window of opportunity to disappear.